Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walahu wa ba'd. Inshallah, for the sake of time and the importance of the topic, inshallah, I will try to cover everything that the research papers handled and addressed in such a short time, inshallah, in 25 minutes. So without any further ado, we delve into the challenges facing Muslim families when it comes to marital discord, marital problems. We have two topics that 5 research papers addressed. The first topic is the marital infidelity, and the second one is the nushuz. The marital infidelity, there are 2 papers. One is submitted by Dr. Salah Al-Sawi and Dr. Mustafa Kamil together, and one submitted by Dr. Ali Ahmed, addressing infidelity. As for the topic of nushuz, very rich topic. So we have 3 papers. One is by our dear Sheikh Dr. Jamal Zarabuzu, and the second one by Dr. Ali Ahmed, and the third one by your brother here. I tried my best to summarize and outline all 3 papers regarding nushuz and the 2 papers regarding infidelity. I also made an analytical comparison between the papers in regards to what they agreed on and what they disagreed on, and inshallah Rabbil Alameen, with your questions, you will enrich the topic more by addressing the panelists straight, inshallah. So if anything is missed in the presentation, inshallah, with your questions, the topic will be covered, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen. Marital infidelity, before we get into it, that is not a known Islamic term, marital infidelity, because the term itself here, in my opinion, indicates that it is considered infidelity if it is only marital, or al-khiyana al-zawjiyya in Arabic, while it is addressing the major sin of zina, or anything that dealing with it. So when Allah Azza wa Jalla addressed it in Quran, and Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam addressed it in the Sunnah, they did not address it as someone betraying someone. It is rather addressed as someone disobeying Allah Azza wa Jalla, and then how you deal with the consequences of that if you are the spouse or you are someone else. But in the Western culture and the Western definition, that's what is implied. So basically, if they are divorced, they can continue doing the exact same thing, but it will not be considered an infidelity. And if it is approved by both in some deviated practice, it will also not be considered as an infidelity. So if the husband and wife both agrees to have other marital relationships, other outer of marriage relationship, haram relationship, it's not going to be considered infidelity because both of them agree and consent. And if they divorce, then they continue doing the same thing, it is not. Before they marriage, if they're doing the same thing, it is not. So it's only a problem because it is a betrayal of the marriage institution. Us as Muslims, that is not what we look at it. So I think we need to work harder in getting the term fixed, maybe in another way. So what is the definition and the seriousness of infidelity? This is handled by Dr. Ahmed's paper. I'm not going to be reading of the paper. This is, inshallah, a presentation. I think it will be available for everybody, as well as the papers with the book that you have, the AMJA book. Of course, it is a grave offense. It is prohibited in Quran. Allah Azza wa Jal addressed fahishat al-zina, fahishatan wa sa'a sabila. It is a great offense. It is a disobedience of Allah. It's disregard for the teachings of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it is a betrayal to the covenant that a Muslim took when they stated that they are a Muslim, and the covenant that a Muslim took when they entered the marriage. Dr. Ali also showed the statistics in this regard, and he showed that 15% of the married women, they engaged in some form of out-of-marriage relationship, while 25% of men, they did the same thing. And when there is an emotional connection or a sexual connection, other than intercourse, it will increase that happening by 20%. What is the teaching of Islamic infidelity and adultery? Adultery, fornication, zina. The Quran prohibited that. And the consequence, of course, there is a penal code in Islam. It is punished by two different ways, if the person is married or unmarried. And of course, Ashab al-Fadila, everybody knows the details of that. We're not here to teach anybody what does that mean. And it is mentioned in the Quran right after disbelieving in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam emphasized on it, especially if it is the wife of somebody known to you. Not literally the neighbor means the next door neighbor, but if somebody known to you, and then doing that with his wife, or that would be considered even a graver issue. What is the impact of that infidelity in marriage? Dr. Ahmed continues, that says it destroys the trust of the marriage. When people come to me for counseling, I always tell them trust is a foundation of marriage, and it takes years to build and seconds to destroy, and it becomes nearly impossible to rebuild again with trust, because it is in the back of the head all the time that this person will not be trusted again, and you need to verify, doubts raise, and all of that. So trust is something that when you're counseling couples, you need to focus on a lot. What is Islamic law on infidelity? Lots of people, and by the way, when this is written here, it means something. Marriage does not dissolve or start the process of dissolving just because someone betrayed or someone committed fahisha or zina. Many, especially sisters, when they come, they consider marriage is done. When she decides that the marriage is done, she thinks it is done, or it starts to be done. And then she isolates herself. She does not allow her husband access to her. She leaves the house. She says, we're done. So that's why Dr. Ahmed here mentioned that it is valid, that it does not dissolve marriage or start the process of dissolving automatically. What are the ways to deal with infidelity? The paper goes on and says, of course, there's the haqq of Allah. You have to do the tawbah for that. And there is the haqq of the individual. So there is individual counseling for both, that they need counseling, whether the person who is the offender need to be counseled, and the person who was offended need to be counseled to heal as well, and both of them need to be counseled together. Now, there is a second paper of Dr. Salah and Dr. Mustafa Kamil that talks about the infidelity, and it delves right away into the reasons of that betrayal or that infidelity. Please keep in mind the definition I mentioned in the beginning. So whenever I use the word, you understand exactly that we are referring to zina, and fornication and anything leading to it. There is lack of awareness or the relationship between the spouse who committed that and Allah Azza wa Jalla is weak. And that's very important when the solution comes, because you have to focus on that. When people come would have problems with their marriage, you always ask them about the relationship with Allah and their relationship with each other, and that's how you go from there. That's how you start from there. So solution for that is to remember Allah's presence subhanahu wa ta'ala. Failing to fulfill marital rights, and that also is a result of not knowing the marital rights between husband and wife. And people neglecting duties and all that, that leads to infidelity as well. Emotional depletion between the spouses. For whatever reason, they do not maintain the emotional aspect of their marriage, so the gap ends up getting bigger and bigger, wider and wider. So they started exploring other options to fulfill that vacancy when it comes to emotional need. We are all need emotions, especially if somebody speaks better and all that, and social media, of course, expedited all of that, as you are all aware. Subhanallah, when Islam prohibits something, it does not prohibit it necessarily for its own sake, but for what it leads to. And that is ghadd al-basar, or lowering the gaze, because it will open the door for other things. So failing in that first step, it will lead a person for sure to the second step. Add to that the emotional need, add to that failure to give duties and rights, Add to that, there is no communication. Of course, the doors would be wide open. Also, forced marriage without consent. And here's an issue also I want to highlight, that forced marriage, arranged marriage, most of the time people mix the two. Arranged marriage is not necessarily a bad thing. Arranged marriage, people arrange and they choose each other and they continue. But forced marriage is cultural and it happens. You'll be surprised. It happens here in the United States in front of our eyes every day. So forced marriages also lead to that, because each one of them may be emotionally attached to someone else, and then it comes from there. Underestimating the dangers of the internet, social media. Kids as young as 4 or 5 years old, they, access internet. You'd be surprised, one of the children who was 5 years old, one time I was talking to, and he said, do you know, Sheikh, that anything you want to find on the internet, you just add .com to it. That's a 5-year-old. He said, whatever comes in your head, put it and add .com, it will come out. So that's a 5-year-old children. Now imagine a 20 or 30-year-old adult wanting to fulfill some need or some emotional vacuum. The wife's display of adornment. Not only the wife's display of adornment, a wife can be also, or a husband can be behind the keyboard or behind the screen, and then they can speak, the voice itself, or the chat, or without even opening their mouth, the same thing will be there. خضوع بالقول, in the tafsir now, it would be more than just hearing the voice of someone. It's way more than that. So neglecting religious guidelines in family relations. Again, the word neglecting, it is for those who know, but sometimes in neglecting knowing the religious rights as well, it's a much bigger issue for us as Imams to deal with our community. Ways to prevent infidelity. Here, you have to carefully choose. And subhanAllah, Islam told us that when a man is looking for a wife and a wife looking for a man, what are the conditions, and the hadith, of course, known to you of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam inviting to that. Now, here's a comparison of the two topics, of the two papers. The paper of Dr. Assawi and Dr. Kamel, the cause of marital infidelity, it focused on identifying and analyzing the root causes of infidelity. And it emphasizes the practical factors, as we mentioned. It provides preventive measurements. It's very important, preventive measurements, as well as healing or curative measurements that, counseling and all of that. While Dr. Ali's paper on infidelity, it concentrates on the moral, ethical, and legal seriousness of infidelity in Islam, and it explains the Quranic and Hadith-based teaching, and it also gets to the end with the same result. Also, the two papers from the religious and moral teachings, the first paper, it focuses more on the personal and behavioral cause of infidelity, while the other paper takes more direct theological and legal approach, explaining how infidelity is framed in Islam and all of that. Preventive measures, both papers give and suggest preventive measures for dealing with the issue of infidelity. And the consequences, also both papers addresses it, some different strategies in different ways, but they agree on the consequence of infidelity as a destructive act to the marital institution. Both of them handle it from a legal perspective. As I said, for the sake of time, presentation will be available for everybody, inshallah, to take a look at it. Statistics, Dr. Ali Ahmed used more in the statistics and relating to the Western look at the infidelity with numbers. And he gives a practical and contemporary advice on the negative, to navigate these issues. Those are the ways to deal with the infidelity, both of the papers addressed, as we mentioned, of course. The summary, Dr. Salah and Dr. Kamil's paper focus on the causes and prevention of infidelity, highlighting the importance of emotional, physical, and religious fulfillment to avoid marital betrayals, while Dr. Ahmed's paper takes a theological and legal approach, explaining the seriousness of infidelity in Islam, the consequence outlined in Islamic law, and steps to seek repentance and reconciliation after infidelity occurs. Now we get to not favorite subject, but an important subject, which is Nushuz. When you say the word Nushuz, everybody think about a wife, a disobedient wife. While the actual linguistic meaning of Nushuz does not indicate that, but also the jurist's definition of Nushuz covers both, husband and wife. And when you look at it, you find the issue is more technical than anything. The Nushuz of the wife, it is handled in a different way than the Nushuz of the husband, based on many factors. The way that Allah Azza wa Jal assigned duties to the man, and the way Allah Azza wa Jal assigned the duties to women, each one. And then based on that, also the factor of qawama, the factor of spending, and the factor of decision making, the nushuz will vary between the two in meaning and consequences, as well as the way it is addressed. I have 3 papers and dealing with nushuz, marital misconduct. Protuberance is a word. I don't know if Dr. Jamal will agree or not, but this is exactly the word in Arabic, linguistically. We may call it spousal protuberance or marital protuberance. But if you look at it from any direction, there is no one English word that will depict exactly the meaning, the denotation and connotation of the word nushuz in Arabic, subhanAllah. So let's use the word nushuz. Let's agree on using the word nushuz, and that's it. So what is the definition according to Dr. Ahmed? He says defiance, refusal, and elevation. And then in the context, most of the jurists refer to the wife's misconduct to the husband and her rejecting the framework within which she has to function as a wife. That would be considered the nushuz of the wife. Then they will talk about the nushuz of the husband secondary after that. As we will see later, Dr. Zarabuzu's paper, he went more specific and called it, wifeful and husband, different types of nushuz, more specific. So it is very important to understand the nushuz within Islamic jurisprudence, and the 4 madhahib, they have different definitions of nushuz. We're not going to go into the details of that, but each one of them, same thing at the end of the day, the same ground, that the wife is doing something that she is advised not to do, and she is not functioning within the framework that she's supposed to be functioning as a wife. So there is Quranic guidance in addressing the nushuz. Of course, the famous verse that I'm 100% sure each of you as an imam had to deal with it, especially the darb part. And everybody have a knee-jerking, thing, and everybody says, no, darb means this, darb means that, and you hear people trying to go around it. Before I get into it, just want to mention, put some historical context to this within the American society here. Back in 1857, 56 or 57, it was considered a good act to keep the domestic stability in the United States, which is promoted by the Constitution, to go and capture a fleeing slave and bring him back to his master. That is considered in the United States here an act that following the Constitution and helping the domestic stability of the United States. So if a slave runs away, everybody trying to bring that slave back. Why? Because that human being was considered a property at that time. And that was good. That was a good act. exactly 100 years later, federal troops will go fight somewhere to make sure that that black child have the right for education. That happens in the United States 100 years apart, right? So two opposite things were there to promote the stability. So when we talk about that, and Allah Azza wa Jalla said, عِظُوهُنَّ وَهَجُرُهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ, you have to understand the context at that time, that this was agreed upon by the two parties executing the contract. That was there. Culturally, religiously, historically, humanly, was an accepted concept. So basically, when we look at it from our time now. As you will see, the three papers reached the same deal at the end, reached the same result, that if darb is not going to bring the result that it used to bring or it will bring, then it's not needed. And our teaching in Islam actually says don't do that method if it is not bringing any good result after. So those are three measurements: admonishment and the desertion in bed and all of that. There is measures, and subhanAllah, Islam taking the sequential, step-by-step kind of, the way to deal with the nushuz. Admonishment or maw'idha. And then after that, desertion in bed and intimacy. And then after that, darb, or the physical discipline. So Dr. Ahmed goes to the ethical guidelines for darb, the prophetic advice for the treatment of wife. So it's not something that you have to do or must do, or on all situations that it should be done. In the Western context, it is ultimately prohibited and it will be considered domestic violence. I'm sure you listened to the lecture in the morning about that. So then we have a paper of our dear Sheikh, Dr. Jamal Zarabuzu, and his paper about focusing on what is the concept of nushuz and its reality. It's a very detailed paper, mashallah. I had the opportunity to see it only yesterday, but alhamdulillah, 40 pages almost, but mashallah, it covers everything. Had I seen that paper before I write mine, I wouldn't have written mine, but that's all right, alhamdulillah. The Sheikh had patience and gave me a chance to do it. So after the Sheikh gives the introduction, the Islamic view of marriage, and then what is the marital discord, then the Sheikh went in more details and explained the nushuz linguistically and from a jurisprudence perspective. And then he mentioned the wifely nushuz. And then the Sheikh went even to the context of the mufassirin, in-depth academia, as well as the Western, and he compared how people tried to go away from the concept of darb and what hitting or corporal applications of that. And then the Sheikh went to the tafsir of the verse of Surah An-Nisa and all of that. For the sake of time, so the outline, the Sheikh compared the Islamic perspective of nushuz and its treatment with the Western legal framework. And he went in details with the concept of nushuz in the Islamic understanding, treatment of nushuz in the Islamic and Western perspectives, and among the key findings that the Islamic law's gradual approach in handling nushuz surpasses the Western system. Those are the some of the papers that what they agreed on. My paper also agreed with both papers of Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Jamal on the definition of nushuz, the Western context, the legal repercussions, and the way to handle it. And I focused more on the arbitration as a way to decide if there is nushuz or not and how to deal with it. Also, there is recommendation from all papers that there has to be, it has to be handled from the fiqh perspective. There has to be some ijtihad, some definition and redefinition of certain aspects of nushuz. Also, in the cultural and legal framework, we have to address it in different ways. And also there have to be centers for family resource centers and family disputes. We have also, I suggested to have, to take a lesson from the Jewish community. About 60 years ago, they started to have their own religious-based courts in the United States, and it's all over. In every city, almost every city in the United States, something called Beit Din, Beit Din, yani. Beit Din, and it has a supreme judge who appoints all the judges in all those courts. And then they have a procedure, which is a hybrid between the religious and the legal system here in the United States. They use the legal language that all the lawmakers understand very well. And then they invented, they're like Islam, once arbitration is done, the hakam finish, then it is done. But they invented something that they can do isti'naf, or they can, people can go again and they can debate the ruling. That makes no single case presented by the Jewish community to the American court system was refused, or the judge made comment on it, or did anything. They just approve it. So I hope we learn from that, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. So at the end of the presentation, I mentioned that the points of agreement about all the three outlines of Nushuz, even though each one of them have a distinct approach, but all agree on many things: the concept of Nushuz, the definition across the schools of thought, the Quranic and Hadith foundation, the ethical limitations and guidelines, the corrective and restorative approach, preference of non-physical solutions, all papers agree on that, and misapplication that becomes abuse after that, and focusing on the correct context, and they have to be culturally sensitive and within the modern challenges. And then there are some, easy differences there about all of them in the context. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give, inshallah, ability to the panelists to answer, inshallah, your questions. Jazakumullah khair for listening. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among those who listen and follow the best of what they listen to. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're going to have a presentation by Mercy USA for 5 minutes, inshallah. Inshallah, we're going to have the next, which is the questions, right? The answer, oh, this one, okay. Yeah. So we have Dr. Basim Hamid. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a Q&A. It's a Q&A, right? Yes. Jazakallah khair. How many minutes? 10 minutes? Okay, thank you. So, as usual, we have two mics, and then the mic of the sisters. Go ahead. One question at a person, please.
Yeah, many times I served actually. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Jazakallah khair. This question is for Dr. Kamal. Jazakallah khair. Yeah. Anyways. In the lecture, you mentioned that one of the pillars to proceed with the khul', that the husband should accept the offer of the wife. So this morning, Dr. Salah, Jazakallah khair, he mentioned that in the story of Buraira, she offered him the garden or whatever mahr he gave her before, but the husband actually didn't want to divorce her, so it means that he didn't accept the offer initially. So, يعني كيف نوفق? How can we make this go along with the story of Buraira? And that we apply that Rasulullah ﷺ, he applied the khulu' in this case, since one of the pillars is missing. The other question is, as a member of Imam Council, our main objective and priority is to mediate between the, husbands. But most of the time we end up, unfortunately, doing just khulu' or tatliq. So in multiple cases, when, the wives, they will come and they will say that we did not see our husbands for like 3 years, 10 years, 20 years. We know nothing about them. And there is no means of communicating with the husband to see whether this wife is telling the truth or not. So how can we solve this problem? And we don't have any way to communicate with the husband. And this is not one case, multiple cases. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I don't know if you misheard Sheikh Salah al-Sawi with regards to that. I don't think he said that. Actually, the person, the Sahabi in question is Thabit ibn Qais and not Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu.
He was saying Barira. Barira.
Ah, I thought he said, yeah.
Marira.
So the difference between the two situations, so if two slaves are married, if one of them is freed, if the woman is freed, and this was the case of the story that the Sheikh Salah was saying this morning, Aisha freed her. So in that case, the freed woman can reject her slave husband. It has nothing to do with khula, it has nothing to do with rejecting the khula. This is her right. As a freed woman now, if her husband is a slave, so now since the change of her status, she can just by herself reject the husband and basically bring the marriage to an end. So it's not related to the question of khula.
Exactly.
With regards to the second question, in which case the wife is claiming that the husband has gone missing, this needs a lot of due diligence. There has to be a process in place in which the Sharia Council exhausts all of its efforts in order to get in touch with the individual. Whether that is through email, whether that's through posts, whether that's through his relatives, or even putting an ad on the social media in order to get his attention. Let's say, for example, you have exhausted every single effort after that, and there has to be a time period in which these efforts needs to be exhausted. Then what we typically do is request the wife to get an affidavit, a signed affidavit, as well as the testimony of 2 male witnesses, which can attest to her claim that the husband has gone missing and she has been abandoned and so on. And then based upon the testimony of 2 individuals, coupled with the fact that you've exhausted your procedure and your process in getting in contact with him, then the Sharia Council, the Islamic Council, based upon the authority that has been given to them by the Muslim community and the senior scholars of that locality, can go ahead and issue a annulment of the marriage, and Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khairan. Go ahead, brother.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam.
My question is for Dr. Mamdouh for his presentation related to Dr. Jamal's paper. It wasn't in the book and it wasn't available beforehand, but there are also some key differences that I think were not highlighted, including what would, the ayah related to qiwama, the definition of that, what that entails, as well as the meaning of وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. So I think it needs to be highlighted, and then Dr. Jamal, I think, should get a chance to explain that as well. Barakallahu feekum.
First, Dr. Jamal is right here, alhamdulillah.
Yes.
And second, I only had 25 minutes to.
Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakallah khair.
Allah Azza wa Jalla.
Barakallahu feekum, inshallah. So first of all, by the way, in defense of Sheikh Mamdouh, my paper only came in 2 days ago. Now, nobody likes to hear excuses, but I have 1,000 excuses for why it came in so late. Let me start, inshallah. We have time?
So, in answer to, however, in answer to your question, so my paper actually, the topics that were covered, so again, because of many different circumstances, I focused just on one aspect, and that is trying to identify what is nushuz and what's the components of nushuz, what falls under the definition of nushuz and what does not seem to fall under the definition of nushuz. And the key, one of the reasons why I wrote the paper is that I find many cases, of course, men, basically invoking this idea of nushuz and many times abusing, physically abusing their wives in the name of nushuz. So first of all, they probably don't really understand like what makes up nushuz as opposed to what does not make up nushuz. In the fiqh works, for example, when they define nushuz, as I discussed in the paper, they are usually pretty specific about the actions which make up nushuz. And keep in mind that scholars like al-Dhahabi and al-Haytami, they both consider nushuz as one of the kabair. So nushuz is a kabira, according to those scholars who made compilations of the major sins. So on many levels, we're not talking about just like a simple act on the part of the wife. She forgot to cook something or something like that, or it's 2 a.m. and there's guests coming and she's not in the mood to make tea or something like that. These examples that I just gave, they may sound silly, but they are real examples of why I know of cases where wives were beaten in the name of nushuz. So that's what I focus on in my paper. So I'm not sure about the question is a little bit confusing to me because I actually did not in the paper get into the discussion of qiwama at all, and nor did I get to the point in the verse وَضْرِبُهُنَّ. So I did not cover either of those two. So I'm not sure. The question kind of gave an impression that maybe we differed on those points, but actually my paper did not get into those two.
Jazakumullahu khairan. There's another session that's going to start. Immediately, yeah.
So we should, we should leave as soon as quickly as.
Yes. And there's a Q&A panel for the same group later on, inshallah.
Do I go and come back or I stay?
More questions?
I did not. I stayed